Few places on this earth elicit wonder and mystery like Madagascar. A place both known, yet lost and far away. An island known for its unique biodiversity, with beaches that rival those of the Maldives. And, of course, the setting of a popular children's franchise. Yet, a country where only 486,000 tourists visited in 2019, while 5 times that number visited Syria the same year. An active war zone. A country consistently in the top 10 poorest countries over the years, yet one of 2 on that list without a war in recent memory. In 2024, Sudan and Somalia, both rocked by conflict, were richer. A country where you might be surprised to be greeted with bonjour, but whose flag you've never seen. Because that's not it, it's this one. I traveled to the exact other side of the planet from my hometown to demystify Madagascar, only to find more questions. What do they eat here? What are lemurs like? Why can't I bring onions anywhere? Tied on my belt, which was the style at the time. If I drink poison and survive, then will you finally believe me? And did I really like to move it? But most importantly, what can I learn about Madagascar's past? Oh, sorry to interrupt. I see you were rushing to hit that subscribe button. No, go ahead. But right after, come travel with me and learn the fun-sized story of Madagascar. Madagascar is a place that floats in the middle of everything, yet somehow still feels isolated, with the winds of history swirling around it, but never quite making landfall. Although this island has captivated parents and children alike with its eponymous animated movies, imprinting gyrating ring-tailed lemurs into the brains everywhere. After one day in Madagascar, it became clear to me that most people don't have the foggiest about this country. And this is partly a result of one of our dirty words, Eurocentrism. As Westerners, a place doesn't really become a part of the world until Europe or European-descended polities begin to interact with it. And for a variety of reasons, Madagascar existed far from the European gaze until recently. But I'm here to learn about this fascinating place, fill in some of the gaps, and tell you this not-so-fun-sized story. Sidebar, I'm trying something new, and this video is going to be longer than usual. Let me know in the comments if you hate it, but if you love it, shoot me a tip on Patreon. Of course, I would need hours to fully cover Madagascar's millennia of history. So, if you find yourself interested, I encourage you to do your own research. Alright, back to business. Walking around Antananarivo, the capital, Tana for short, something struck me, besides the exceedingly long names on everything. The average person here doesn't look so, well, African. And based on this observation, it might not surprise you that the native language here, malagasy, which renders some of these name monstrosities, is not related to any language on the African continent. Some might think of this island as Nowheresville, but it is absolutely not, even since ancient times. This becomes clear when we learn that the closest linguistic relative of malagasy is a language called Maanyan, native to the island of Borneo. Here. Okay, what? Yes, Madagascar's first human inhabitants were in fact migrants from what we now know as Indonesia, likely arriving by outrigger canoe in the 4th to 6th centuries AD. Given that many Madagascar natives could easily blend in the crowd in Manila or Jakarta, this patrimony is clear on its face. Or on the face of the person driving your bus, or on the face of the person selling you your SIM card. The island that these original Indonesian migrants found is fascinating to imagine. Already cut off from mainland Africa for millions of years, it was heavily forested and full of megafauna. Animals from species that had grown large and slow due to a lack of natural predators. Based on a biological principle known as Foster's rule or the island effect. When species lack predatory pressure, which often happens when islands are separated from a larger landmass, animals can experience gigantism and or dwarfism. So, on Madagascar, hippopotamuses shrank in size, while other species grew massive, like the elephant bird, large and flightless, and double the size of an ostrich. This separation from the African continent also led to the rise of Madagascar's most famous inhabitants, the lemurs. They evolved separately from monkeys and apes, but are still primates, hence our distant cousins. You can see the resemblance with their big ol' kinda nasty thumbs that they use to cling onto trees. Just like our uncles. My uncles. Lemurs were also subject to the island effect, with one species, Archaeoindris, growing to the size of a gorilla. Now imagine wading through turquoise water after disembarking your boat 1,500 years ago and encountering a coastline overflowing with trees. As you peer between the greenery, you see a giant, furry, bethumbed, basically Pokemon, strolling their way along. And when night falls, your fire raises your awareness to hundreds of pairs of shiny eyes in the brush. These first arrivals, known as the Fasim, are shrouded in mystery. And the way that today's inhabitants remember these original people is ambiguous. Traditionally, the Fasim are seen as ancestors, but also primitive and almost demonic. So, on one hand, rock-covered mounds on the island, believed to be Fasim tombs, are revered, as are sacred bogs and marshes where they were said to leave their dead to decompose and thus imbue the water with a sacred essence, almost like holy water. But at the same time, they were believed to have long teeth and glowing red eyes. This smacks of dehumanization, and it makes sense. The Fasim, being people already occupying space, likely needed to be displaced or exterminated to make way for later settlers. For a place already understood as the domain of some original mythical ancestors, it's no surprise then that the whole island is still steeped in other mystical traditions. And one still felt today is the concept of Fady, a strict rule system that governs all behavior. Fady is best understood as a type of taboo. Since English gets that word from the Polynesian languages, and the Malagasy are related to their cousins from the Pacific Islands, there might be a through line. Fady rules vary among ethnicities on the island. They govern everything from days on which children should be born, to your status in society, to even the very food that you eat. So, when you climb to the Queen's Palace in Tana and you see signs forbidding you from bringing in pork, onions, or garlic, that's Fady in action. Even the word in Malagasy for sorry or excuse me, azafady, literally means, may it not be Fady for me. So our ancient settlers arrived to this island full of giant, slow-moving creatures, and they did what we humans always do everywhere we go. Hunt them to extinction. Clearly, that was not Fady. Agent Smith from The Matrix was right, y'all. Human beings are a disease. Later in Madagascar's history, we know that significant populations of Bantu-descended people came over from the African mainland, adding their traditions to the island's cultural milieu. Arabic traders set foot here as well, which we know after discovering texts written in Sorab, an Arabic alphabet adapted to the native language. Finally, there are also archaeological finds of various luxury goods typical to the wider Indian Ocean cultural world. Meanwhile, Europeans were visiting this island as they muscled in on the Indian Ocean trade. And lots of valuable goods on slow-moving ships, just like Madagascar's megafauna, make for easy targets. We all know the Pirates of the Caribbean. Well, some of these intrepid raiders decided to leave the reggae and the red stripe behind and travel to the other side of the world to make their fortune. Today, on the eastern side of Madagascar, on an island called Nosbora, you can see a graveyard where many of these pirates are buried. Not quite a pirate, but a sailor nonetheless, a man named Robert Drury had the misfortune of being marooned on the southern tip of Madagascar. His later account, which he managed to write when he got home, is fascinating but long, so I'll pick out some of the more curious tidbits. Drury describes being enslaved by several groups and then later fighting with them against their rivals. He recounts nighttime raids where warriors would take a drug named Germogla, which made them resolute in his words. Even cooler, in order to sneak into an enemy village, they would carry meat with them to throw to the guard dogs to stop them from barking and alerting their enemies. Alright, let's regroup and set the scene for the next episode of our story. Our ancient elves came to Madagascar, killed all the Snorlaxes, and then were later displaced by settlers who brought a rigid rule system named Fady. Bantu migrants then also came to settle, with Europeans and Arabs making occasional appearances. All of this combines to show that Madagascar was very much the opposite of the island that time forgot. Now, European trade started to become global, and the island became more illuminated to our historical gaze as yet another country plagued by the twin scourges of the African continent, slavery and colonialism. At the same time, we see the rise of the Merina people in the Central Highlands. Their leaders would start a ruling dynasty which would interact with European monarchs and unite the island, though, as we shall see, not entirely successfully. Merina society was organized around the Rufa, hill forts from which they projected their power. The most famous of this lineage was, and man, I'm gonna try, Antananarivo Merina, a king from the 1700s who united his people. Outside of Tana, you can visit his Rufa, where later Merina kings set up shop. In the 1700s, the Central Highlands of Madagascar, which are inhabited by the Merina people, were fractured into 4 different kingdoms, which led to a civil war that lasted about 77 years. It was from here that the leader Antananarivo Merina launched his campaign to conquer Antananarivo and unify the kingdom, which ended the civil war. The process of unification required decades of civil war, and now there was a market to sell any troublesome prisoners of war to foreigners who would take them across the ocean. Slaves from Madagascar became so cheap that they flooded the market and threatened the monopoly of the British East India Company. Sales of Malagasy slaves by anyone but the company was illegalized by an act of parliament. And in a bizarre twist of fate, due to that distinct appearance that I previously mentioned, shady brokers trying to pass them off as continental Africans had a very difficult time. This also created a huge labor shortage, so amazingly, Madagascar became a major exporter and importer of slaves. The result was a larger foreign element from mainland Africa. And then, out of nowhere, the same English elites that had been expanding slavery over centuries suddenly decided that they were banning it worldwide. Paradoxically, the abolition of slavery actually led to more European involvement in Africa under the pretext of stopping the barbaric practice. If a place like Madagascar resisted the abolition of slavery, well, then the British had a reason to swoop in as the good guy and take control. You know, to force those people to stop forcing other people to do stuff. So Britain and other European powers started relations with the Merina kings. King Radama I welcomed European influence, and especially liked his army being trained by British soldiers. He also let Christian missionaries, the engines of cultural conquest, run free on the island. Now, with slavery waning, workers were in short supply. So the Merina kings established the Fanumpuan system of forced labor, where subjects were required to serve in the military or do harsh agricultural work several times per week. By the early 1800s, Madagascar was in crisis. Let's pause here. I am nowhere near a scholar of Madagascar history. I'm just a guy with a history degree and access to JSTOR articles through my public library. But as I visited this country, I was perplexed by what I saw. How has a country so rich in resources and potential for tourism, with its unique wildlife and unparalleled natural beauty, remained so underdeveloped? I believe history has the answer. I'm going to argue that Madagascar suffered from a distinct instability, for which the intended solutions only made things worse. This left the island open to victimization by European powers, and of course, the inevitable colonization that followed didn't help either. Slavery and Fanumpuan disrupted traditional life in a variety of ways. You see, Fanumpuan was a vicious cycle. The working population was already low, but the system blocked opportunities for young adults, making marriage less likely, and when couples already existed, they were ripped apart for long periods of time. Moreover, workers were fed very little, and for teenagers, this possibly delayed puberty. All this combined to lower fertility, meaning less people, and the cycle continued. Europeans brought new sexually transmitted diseases. Fanumpuan kept men away from their wives, who then visited prostitutes, and the new diseases thrived. STDs can also make people infertile. Fady was of no help. The entire belief system is steeped in magic, and among certain groups, children were only allowed to be born on certain days. Those that weren't could be abandoned to die or sometimes killed. Meanwhile, slavery meant ripping natives away from the land, while also importing foreigners, adding to an already complex ethnic situation. And when social strife comes into the mix, a common human response is conspiracy theories. In the 1820s and 30s, an intense wave of paranoia over musav, or witchcraft, swept the country. In other words, first a population/fertility crisis, and then witchcraft accusations to explain it. During malaria epidemics, mainland Africans were less affected by the disease, likely due to the sickle cell trait, which lends some immunity. But this increased witchcraft suspicions among the natives. Christian missionaries flooded the island, bringing Jesus Christ, who was seen as the ancestor spirit of the Europeans, more powerful than the ancient ones in Madagascar, which led to despair. Furthermore, the missionaries, likely inspired by the Enlightenment, recorded the stars and weather patterns for scientific purposes, adding to suspicion that they were witches. And now Radama I died without heirs and his queen took over, in my opinion, Madagascar's most interesting monarch. She was another victim of the nationwide freakout over witchcraft and had exactly the wrong solution. Queen Ranavalona I came to power in 1828, and by the end of her reign, 200 to 300,000 of her subjects were dead by her command. As I often ask you fun-sizers, let's put ourselves in the Queen's shoes to understand her context. Madagascar was a country of wildly different cultures, who had recently been conquered by the European-trained armies of her husband. Needless to say, many of her subjects were likely not fond of her or Merina hegemony. Her solution was to institute a purge, which we will see mirrored those of 20th century authoritarian regimes. Enemies of the state could be accused of witchcraft and subjected to the tangana or poison ordeal. This involved consuming a cardiac poison extracted from a pretty cute sounding fruit, the sea mango. Survival would indicate purity and truthfulness. Tangana was likely an ancient practice in Madagascar, but usually was administered to a farm animal, often a chicken, as a stand-in for the person being tested. With the rise of the Merina, however, it began to be applied to humans, and the chicken aspect continued in the form of a piece of chicken skin you would eat after swallowing the poison. Vomiting up the chicken skin was seen as proof of innocence, and likely saved the life of the person by vomiting up the poison as well. So the queen would order people to undergo tangana at her whim. Each of her court slaves had undergone the ordeal at least 7 times, and an English missionary estimated that at least 1/10 of the population had done it at least once. This is a process that by some accounts had a 33 to 55% mortality rate. When the queen had bad dreams, tangana. When she got sick, tangana. In times of national crisis, believe it or not, straight to tangana. In 1845, the French bombarded the port of Tamatave, and this required a national cleansing. Thousands of people were selected by raffle, Hunger Games style, to eat the poison. Of course, this resulted in massive depopulation. Also, I need you to understand the intense paranoia. In many ways, the atmosphere foreshadowed society in Stalinist Soviet Union. To save themselves, people would denounce their neighbors for witchcraft. If you were found guilty, meaning you died, after being accused by a third party, your family was at risk of being sold into slavery. So unbelievably, people would denounce themselves preemptively and go through the ordeal, because at least their family would be spared. Now the question becomes, could I survive the poison ordeal of Madagascar? The answer is yes, by paying someone off. The tangana dose could vary in strength, so if you grease the palm of the official administering the dose, they could ensure a better likelihood of survival. A few decades after Queen Ranavalona I died, the French officially took over Madagascar as a colony in 1899. Colonial rule lasted until 1969, at which part Madagascar's independent history begins. Given that this video is already way longer than expected, we'll stop our journey there. So where are we now? Madagascar continues to be an exceedingly beautiful country that you should highly consider visiting. The people are amazing, the food is delicious, and the environment is unique, although disappearing thanks to stupid climate change. You can't see lemurs anywhere else in the world, and not only are they so cute, but hearing the whale song call of the Indri could sadly, in a few decades, never be heard by anyone again. Here's a quick tip. When you get here, eat some traditional food like ravitutu or a nice zebu steak. Don't eat the sea mango. So remember, history is just a story of you and me in different times and different circumstances. If you like this slightly king-sized history of Madagascar, let me know in the comments and I'll continue making longer videos. Of course, subscribe, tell your friends, follow me on Instagram, join the conversation on Reddit, and consider becoming a patron at patreon.com. As you say in Malagasy, faluma, don't eat the semen.